Hi class, in this recording we're going to focus on the midbrain and also the reticular formation. So let's dive into it. As we're looking at the midbrain is the most superior, the most most rostral part of the brainstem. So just to review, we've talked about the medulla oblongata, that's the inferior portion of the brainstem. We talked about the pons, which is superior to the medulla oblongata, and now we're going to be focusing on the midbrain. Now, as we look at the midbrain, it's a fairly short segment of the brainstem, and it's going to connect the hindbrain to forebrain. So when we say hindbrain to forebrain, that's a nice way of saying that the midbrain is kind of a relay station that helps to relay or connect many different parts of the brain. Within the very center of the midbrain, we have a structure known as the cerebral aqueduct. This cerebral aqueduct is going to help to connect the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle. So in our cross-sectional view right here, we can see the fourth ventricle of the midbrain, and this is going to be located, this slice is within the pons. The midbrain right here is going to be the interface between the diencephalon, which is above, and the pons, which is directly beneath that. And as we're looking at the cerebral aqueduct, it has lots of gray matter, and this gray matter surrounding the cerebral aqueduct is helpful in modulating or controlling our pain response. We're also going to contain the reticular formation. When we think of the reticular formation, this is a loose web of gray matter that we'll talk about in a couple slides that helps to connect and interface many different parts of the brainstem. We're also going to have the motor nuclei of two cranial nerves. These two cranial nerves are cranial nerve 3, oculomotor, and cranial nerve number 4, the trochlear nerve. And these cranial nerves help to control eye movements. So as we're looking at the midbrain, in this figure, the midbrain is red, and I really love this figure, and the diencephalon is blue and located superiorly to the midbrain. Within the midbrain, we have 4 bulges. These 4 bulges are, within the midbrain we have a tectum, and the tectum is the roof of the midbrain and posterior to the cerebral aqueduct. This tectum is going to be made up of 4 bulges called the corpora quadrigemini. Quad is prefix meaning 4. Gemini is a suffix referring to the Gemini constellation or twins. So we think of the corpora quadrigemini, it's 4 bumps that are in groups of 2 or paired in groups of 2, kind of like twins. And we can see those corpora quadrigemini right here. We have the inferior colliculi and the superior colliculi. For me in particular, when I do sheep brain dissections, I like to call the superior colliculus the baby's butt because it looks a lot like a baby's butt during the dissections. As we look at the superior colliculi, they help us with function with visual attention, so we can track eye movements, and there's a little bit of reflexes, but mostly the superior colliculus helps us with looking at something that's moving. And as we look at the inferior colliculi is going to receive signals from the inner ear, and when we think of the inner ear, I want you to think of taking our sense of balance, our 3D orientation in space, and converting that to signals that are processed by the nervous system, and or think of taking sound waves and converting those into action potential signals. So with that inferior colliculi, this will receive signals from the inner ear and then relay that to the thalamus, which is going to be this large bulge up here within the diencephalon. Thalamus is labeled right here on our graph, and when we look at our thalamus, it's this big bulge. We have 2, one on the left and right. We also have the cerebral peduncles. Our cerebral peduncles are on left and right, and here we can see the fibers, the tracks of the cerebral peduncle. This is the right cerebral peduncle. The left cerebral peduncle is not shown. The cerebral peduncle has the tegentum, the substantia nigra, and the cerebral crux, and this serves primarily to anchor the cerebrum to the brainstem proper. Here's a cross-sectional, a mid-sagittal slice of the midbrain. So here we can see our midbrain located right here. We have the corpora quadrigemini that are posterior. We have the cerebral peduncles, which would be located right here. They're kind of hard to see in this mid-sagittal view. Typically, we need an anterior view or a lateral view to get a good shot of the cerebral peduncle. And then located in the center, I'll use red for this one, we have the cerebral aqueduct, connecting the third to the fourth ventricle. where our third ventricle is going to be located. Up here by the thalamus, and then our fourth ventricle is located down here near the cerebellum. As we look at the tegentum has a structure that dominating it called the red nucleus. I should go to red for this. The red nucleus. And as we look at this red nucleus, it's very appropriately named because it has a slightly red coloration during dissections. And as we're looking at this tegentum that is made up of the red nucleus, it has a red color because of lots of blood vessels which are present in it. And it helps to connect the cerebellum to the brainstem for motor control. This is a key concept here. When you think of the cerebellum in particular, I want you to think of motor control. We also have the substantia nigra because of this root word nigra, meaning black. I'm going to use the black color. Think of it as the black substance. So as we look at the substantia nigra, it's going to have a darker coloration within the midbrain. The substantia nigra is pigmented with melanin. Melanin is that pigment that gives us the dark brown black pigmentation to our skin. So think all the way back to the integumentary system, melanin being produced by the melanocytes. The substantia nigra is a motor relay center. So it relays signals from the thalamus and basal nuclei. Now, if you don't remember, a nuclei within the central nervous system is just a grouping of neurosomas, or cell bodies of neurons. So when we think of a nuclei in the central nervous system, it's just a region of gray matter. And what does the substantia nigra do? As it relays inhibitory signals to the thalamus and substantia and the basal nuclei, it prevents unwanted body movement. So if there's damage to the substantia nigra, there's going to be a lot of unwanted tremors. This can lead to Parkinson's disease. And these particular tremors are not the kind of tremors associated with when you're moving. These are continual tremors, unintended tremors, as opposed to intention tremors, which are associated with only when you're trying to move your body. As we're looking at the reticular formation, our reticular formation is going to be a web of gray matter. And this web of gray matter is going to run through all levels of the brainstem. So it's going to extend vertically through the brainstem. And then once it gets to the thalamus, it's then going to radiate outward to many different areas of the cerebrum, or the gray matter of the cerebrum. It has connections to many areas of the cerebrum. And as we look at the reticular formation, there's more than 100 small neural networks that really don't have any distinct boundaries. When we think of the reticular formation, I want you to think of it as a way to mesh, connect, and synchronize many different parts of the brain: the brainstem, diencephalon, and cerebrum. They are all going to be linked together by this reticular formation. So as we're looking at the reticular formation, because it goes to many different parts of the brain, it does many different things. For instance, it helps with somatic motor control, or voluntary motor control and involuntary motor control. So, for example, it helps us to adjust muscle tension. We can maintain tone, balance, and posture. It also is going to help us to relay signals from the eyes and ears to the cerebellum. And when we think of eyes and ears sending signals to the cerebellum, I want you to think of maintaining your sense of balance. We're also going to use the reticular formation to help integrate visual, auditory, balance, emotional stimuli just for more overall coordination. We have some gaze centers present. These gaze centers are going to allow the eyes to track and or fixate on objects, even if the eyes are moving. We also have some central pattern generators. When we think of a central pattern generator, I want you to think of some neurons that depolarize on a regular or periodic basis. And this will help us to breathe in and out. Also, when we initiate the swallowing process, once we start that process, there needs to be a cascade of coordinated muscle movements, and those coordinated muscle movements that must happen automatically are regulated by those central pattern regulators or generators. We also are going to use the reticular formation for cardiovascular control. It helps to regulate the strength of the contraction of the chambers of the heart and also the rate of contraction of the chamber of the heart, the frequency that they contract. This is going to influence cardiac output, the amount of blood leaving the heart, and overall blood pressure. We also are going to use the reticular formation for pain modulation. As we're sensing pain or processing pain, some of those signals need to pass through the reticular formation. And depending on the situation, we may be able to have some analgesic effects on our own body. You probably experience this when you're excited, you're hyped up, you're amped up, and you get a scratch on your leg, you skin your knee, you get a boo-boo or an owie during an athletic event, and you don't feel it. But then after the athletic event is done, you notice all those little owies you were incurring. Some of those analgesic pathways are going to begin in the reticular formation and go down into the spinal cord where they block transmission. So they can block the pain from even being perceived by your brain. So in other words, we can do our own spinal blocks on ourselves automatically, which I think is pretty cool. Our reticular formation helps to regulate sleep and consciousness as well. In particular, it helps us to regulate how alert we are and our sleep cycles. Individuals that have damage to the reticular formation may have a coma induced. So this is another key function of the reticular formation. For me in particular, my infant daughter was crying for 3+ hours last night, and my reticular formation is really telling me I should still be in bed and not making a lecture recording. Our reticular formation also helps us with habituation. And I'm not talking about having a habit like, I don't know, tying your shoes with loops versus rabbit ears, something like that. We're talking about the ability to ignore repetitive, inconsequential stimuli. For example, when you put on a pair of glasses, you notice that pair of glasses, and they're very noticeable for the first couple minutes. But after a couple minutes, you stop thinking about the pair of glasses. Or earrings, or for me in particular, I remember when I first got married, my wedding ring was so hard for me to wear. It was super distracting for me to wear. Now, I hardly even notice my wedding ring. That's all I have for this recording. If you have any questions, please feel free to post on the class discussion board, shoot me an email, and as always, happy studies.